Hi everyone, welcome back. 3 things before we get going. Sorry about last week. I was sick. Still kind of getting over it. If I sound sick, I am sick. It's fine. But I feel a whole lot better than what I did this time last week. Like, I slept for an entire day. And you know, if you're ever sick, your brain just kind of goes into... So yeah, I was like, I'm not doing. 2, my job that I do outside of this, because I do have a normal job, blew the hell up last week. Over the next coming months, I'm going to try to get a video out as much as I can. And 3, y'all have been loving my Lily Alb and Marsha P. Johnson video. To all of you who have watched and commented on both of these, I love you so much. Thank you so much. Hello, new subscribers as well. Welcome, new Herstorians. Welcome to the Herstory channel. And with that, since my brain is not doing okay, we're just gonna get into this video because it's already been 3 minutes and we're gonna get going into this video. Okay, welcome new subscribers to this channel. You're getting me when I'm sick. Welcome to my channel. World War II. I know it's Pride Month, just stick with me here. What if I told you that one of the best fighter pilots in the British Army during World War II was a transgender woman? Roberta Cowell was that total badass. Let's get started. I'm already sick sweating. Born Robert Marshall Cowell, Roberta Elizabeth Marshall Cowell was born on April 8, 1918 in Croydon, London, England. Also known as Bob and later Betty, was one of 3 children to mother Dorothy Elizabeth Miller, and her father was Major General Sir Ernest Marshall Cowell, who was a high-ranking military surgeon, and he served in the First World War and would later serve in the Second World War. Since she had the father she did, and he had the status he did, Roberta was guaranteed a high education at tuition single-sex schools. She went to Whitgift School. When Roberta went to the school, it was known as Whitgift Grammar School and was an all-boys public school till it became an independent school in 1946, still an all-boys school. At this school, she was a passionate member of the school's motor club because from a young age, she developed a great interest in cars, racing, and the mechanics of it. Quote, "It was the be-all and nearly the end-all of my existence," end quote. I feel like I sound like crap. Also from an early age, she felt conflicted about her gender. Her inner conflict didn't help that since her family's status was what it was, being the typical upper middle class family in London at the time, the family was religious, strict, and unforgiving. Like any adolescent and teenager, Betty or Bob was sensitive about being overweight. She was a chubby child, wore glasses, and was left-handed. That all equaled bullying because kids are freaking mean. As a teenager, he was called bottom and circumference by his peers. Damn! And since it was at the time, was forced to learn to write with his right hand. I did a deep dive into why this was a thing. I still don't understand why being left-handed was basically a sin. Since he was conflicted with his identity, he would compensate his feminine traits, urges, for an aggressive masculine persona so that the gay men would see him as one of them. Towards the end of high school, she took a trip to Austria, Belgium, and Germany with a school friend. At this time, she had a hobby of photography and filmmaking. Get this! While in Germany, she filmed a kind film, one of those old, those things, of a group of Nazis doing drills. Alright, you know, because let's just film some Nazis. Apparently that was illegal because she got arrested. Because apparently filming Nazis doing drills is illegal. The Nazi times were weird times and scary times. Luckily, she was released because she agreed to destroy the film, but was able to somehow switch film and kept the original footage. And I know what you're thinking, I wish I did, but no, I couldn't find it. And yes, I am very upset about that. God. When Roberta graduated at 16 in 1934, she worked briefly as an apprentice engineer for the next year till she joined the General Aircraft Limited as an apprentice aircraft engineer before joining the Royal Air Force in 1935. She wanted to become a fighter pilot, but found that she suffered from air sickness and was deemed unfit to fly with the Royal Air Force. Since she couldn't fly, in 1936, she went to the University College London to study engineering. See, Roberta was an adrenaline junkie, so since he can't get his fix in a plane, he did it in a car. Because if you can't go vroom vroom in the air, you can go vroom vroom on the ground. He began motor racing in 1936 and won his class at the Land's End Speed Trial in a Riley car, and by 1939 owned 3 cars and competed in the 1939 Antwerp Grand Prix in Belgium. By this time, the Second World War was approaching quickly, and on December 28, 1940, was commissioned into the Royal Army Service Corps as second lieutenant. During his time in college, he met Diana Margaret Zelma Carpenter. She was also studying engineering and raced. By June 1941, they were married and had 2 daughters, Annie in July 1942 and Diana in August 1944. Though he was originally dismissed from being able to fly, World War II had arrived and Britain needed all the manpower it could get. So by 1942, Roberta was flying. On July 24th, 1942, he was transferred from the Army to the Royal Air Force, or RAF, with the rank of Temporary Pilot Officer, because before the war, he got a private pilot's license and completed RAF flying training at the RAF ANSI. This was a former RAF station or airfield. Roberta was a badass in the Air Force. By 1944, she served a tour with the No. 4 Squadron RAF. This squadron was assigned to do aerial reconnaissance. During the war, the squadron flew many different types of planes. However, by mid-1944, the squad was flying the Spitfire PRX-1. Or 7. No. X is 10, that's 11. The Spitfire PR-11, or X-1, however it's said. I'm sick. Which was an unarmed camera-equipped version of the submarine Spitfire plane, which was the more common plane used by the Allies before, during, and after World War II. In fact, it was the only British fighter plane made continuously throughout the war. Her plane, though fast and stealthy, since it was unarmed, made her common flights over German-occupied territories a little bit kind of very dangerous. Shortly before D-Day, on June 4th, 1944, Roberta had a very lucky escape when her oxygen system freaking malfunctioned at, 31,000 feet in the freaking air. And if you don't like planes or are uncomfortable with planes or are okay with planes but is a little bit freaked out because Boeing is kind of falling apart, this next section is gonna... The escape happened after she freaking passed out. But somehow, with he passed out, the plane, it just kept going, kept flying on its own for over an hour over German-occupied France while freaking anti-aircraft German guns fired at her. Her oxygen, which is important when you're in air, goes kaplunk. At this time. Plane, still going. While luckily, at some point, she regained a little consciousness at low altitude. So what that means, kaboom, 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 as the plane's going on its own and slowly going like this. And then she goes, oh, shoot. And was able to fly and land at the squad's base at RAF Gatwick. That is an angel watching over you if I've ever heard. By October 1944, Number 4 Squadron was based in Belgium, and their Spitfires were replaced with the Hawker Typhoon FRIBs, which was a photo reconnaissance version of the same plane, but a fighter bomber. On November 18th, 1944, Roberta, was piloting a pair of Typhoons on a low-level attack near Bocholt, Germany. During the flight, he had blown up a couple of things on the ground. However, his plane's engine was knocked out, and one of the wings got a hole from a German anti-aircraft gun. Flying too low to bail out, he successfully glided his plane to a dead stick crash landing. An example of this is how the U.S. Airways Flight 1549 was landed in the Hudson River in 2009. He was able to radio his companion that he was unharmed before he was captured by German troops and was sent to the POW camp of Stuckluft 1. Dodged kabooms with his plane, passed out. Now we're a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany. Told you this person's a badass. He was a prisoner of war for the next 5 months, give or take. He occupied his time by teaching classes in car engineering to the other inmates. Towards the end of the war, food at the camp was getting scarce. Robert lost 50 pounds and later admitted to killing the camp's cats and eating them raw. By April of 1945, the Red Army had advanced into German-occupied territories and was approaching the camp Robert was in. Now, initially, the Germans wanted to evacuate the camp, but the prisoners refused to leave. After a senior American officer and a German officer, the Germans abandoned Stuckluft 1 and went west, leaving the prisoners and Robert behind. The Red Army reached and liberated the camp the night of April 30th, 1945, and British prisoners were flown back to the UK about 2 weeks later. If I sound boring, I'm sick. I'm doing okay, I feel, but I feel like I sound boring. When Robert returned home, like all veterans of World War II and of any war ever, he suffered with PTSD and horrific flashbacks, which made it difficult to go back to the mundane family life with his wife and daughters. So she threw himself back into racing, and by 1946 founded a motor racing team that competed in events all over Europe, including the Brighton Speed Trials, a speed race that is commonly thought to be the oldest running motor race in England. They also competed in the Grand Prix at the Rouen-les Essarts, which at the time, when it first opened in 1950, was recognized as one of Europe's finest circuits. Though he was doing the car racing vroom vroom stuff, he still felt empty, like something was missing, and the feeling of hopelessness started to take hold. With that, Robert fell into a Great Depression. Between the PTSD and the depression, it made his marriage to Diana unhappy and it began to unravel. And by 1948, they separated, and it was after that that Robert realized he needed help. So he sought out therapy. Specifically, he sought out the leading Freudian psychiatrist. Freudian is a psychological theory thought up by Sigmund Freud that focused on the importance of sexuality in human behavior. He was unsatisfied with Sigmund's help, so he went to another Freudian psychiatrist. While under therapy with this psychiatrist, Robert later said, quote, "It became quite obvious that the feminine side of my nature, which all my life I had known of and severely repressed, was very much more fundamental and deep-rooted than I had supposed." End quote. By the 1950s, Roberta began living a double life. He began taking large doses of estrogen to enhance his femininity, but still lived life as a man. During this time, she became acquainted with British physician and first trans man to receive a phalloplasty, the construction or reconstruction of a penis, Michael Dillon. She became acquainted with him after reading his 1946 volume, Self, A Study in Endocrinology and Ethics. This proposed the idea that individuals should have the right to change their gender in order to have the body they desired. No flippin' shoot, Sherlock. From this shared thought, they became close friends. Michael later did an inguinal orchiectomy, which is, I actually said that, which is when one or both testicles are surgically removed. I love how science puts very complex sounding words to very simple explanations. This surgery was kept a secret because at the time this procedure was illegal in the UK. I'm laughing because of the word. Under the mayhem laws, this made it illegal to intentionally maim another person. This includes cutting off a part of the body. Now, at the facts, I get what they're saying. Intentionally maim. Don't intentionally maim somebody. Please don't intentionally maim somebody. But if the person asks to get a gender reassignment surgery, like, you see how that can be weird? After this procedure, he was able to present himself to a private gynecologist and was able to obtain from him stating that her body showed prominent female sex characteristics. Quote, wide hips and narrow shoulders, pelvis female in type, hair distribution, and skin female in type. The absence of laryngeal relief, no Adam's apple, and a tendency of the lower limbs to coverage towards my knees. My breast formation was examined and judged to be typically feminine, though very little developed. End quote. With this document, a new birth certificate was given to him that showed him as a female. She later wrote that people would openly speculate about her gender. Quote, I preferred to steer clear of children and elderly ladies. They were too observant or at least too outspoken in their remarks. End quote. I was around a kid one day that just looked at an overweight man and just screamed, that person's fat. On May 15th, 1951, Roberta had a vaginoplasty. This operation was done by New Zealand otolaryngologist, basically an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Again, science putting very long, complex words to very simple terms. And considered the father of modern-day plastic surgery, Sir Harold Gillies. He became famous following World War I when he helped 5,000 disfigured soldiers reconstruct their faces from artillery blasts. He had operated on Michael before Roberta. However, at this time, vaginoplasty was an entirely new procedure, and Harold did this procedure on Roberta using examples he had done on soldiers reconstructed their penises that had been, Now, in comparison, Lily Elbe, unfortunately deceased by this time, had her vaginoplasty in 1931. So by the time Roberta had her vaginoplasty, medicine and this procedure had come a long way. With this surgery and her new gender, on May 15, 1951, Robert's name on his birth certificate was officially changed to Roberta Elizabeth Marshall Cowell. Now, this is where it just sucks. So, Roberta had divorced his wife, right? Now, this is admirable of her because she decided to be her true self. And since this was the times, knew that the wife and the kids would be looked down upon, would be difficult to live with, and as a trans person would just be an awkward conversation starter. Now, after some, I would assume, very deep soul searching, Roberta decided to cut all ties with her ex-wife and the children in hopes to spare them from the criticism and publicity that was just gonna come. Now, this is where it really sucks. After claiming she was intersex and in order to get the sex reassignment surgery, the only legal way to do it was she had to deny her daughters that he fathered, claiming that they were a product of an affair his ex-wife had when he was at war. Man, that sucks. By 1954, Roberta's two businesses, her car racing company called Leecroft of Ingham and a clothing company, both went out of business. From a combination of trading slowing down and since the gender change, it made it impossible to continue her Grand Prix racing career. In March of 1954, Roberta's story was published in the Picture Post, a photojournalistic magazine in the UK. According to the Sydney Daily Telegraph, the British press... There's a bird on my front porch. Sorry, The British press, being the outstanding people they are, were skeptical that Roberta had a sex change, saying that medical, and I'm putting this here, they didn't put it, but I am, experts that they consulted debunked the claim that Roberta had a sex change in the first place, and claimed that Roberta sold her story to the Picture Post to the equivalent of $435,000 today. The article had a tone of wonder to it, talking about the medical science and how attractive she now was. Because, the science is really cool, but, she's also kind of hot. However, in the Sydney article, it said that Charles Eugene Dessau, a Canadian doctor who under statutory declaration, which is basically like being sworn under oath, said that Roberta's certificate that allowed her to register as a female was not meant to prove that Roberta has become physically complete female. Quote, "It was rather in the nature of a working certificate to enable plastic surgeons to carry out their operations," end quote, and that, quote, "publicity resulting from the Cowell case has brought forward an astounding number of men who want to emulate Cowell's example. One British doctor reported this week that he had received 456 demands for similar operations," end quote. The Belfast Telegraph said about Roberta's operations, quote, "The extraordinary truth is that 3 years ago, Bob Cowell disappeared. Roberta Cowell appeared. Bob, the young man who had been a husband and the father of 2 children, became Roberta, a sensitive young woman and a potential wife," end quote. Her autobiography, called Roberta Cowell's Story by Herself, was soon published after the Picture Post article broke, and she got an additional $65,000 in today's money from that. With the money from the article and her book, she was able to continue her motor racing career. In 1957, she won the Shelsley Walsh Speed Hill Climb, a hill climb race that, you near on tight turns and you go up a hill. That is one of the oldest motorsports events in the world and the oldest to happen continuously on its original course since 1905. She won this race with a record time of 40.41 seconds on a course that is how long? I should have put this in here, but is 1,000 yards. And if you look at the video that I found of her, doesn't she look like a total badass in this footage? Oh my gosh, she looks like a total badass. Those turns are tight. 40.41 seconds. Record time. Boom. And that next year, she led her own team of women drivers, and I'm mad I couldn't find the photo, in the Le Mans 24-hour sports car classic. Also in that year, I want to make clear, I don't know if this is true or not, but I also really want to make clear that I really hope it is. She reported to have received 400 marriage proposals. That included offers of land and titles. Were they intentional marriage offers? I don't flippin' know. The point is, she got 400 of them, and some of them offered not only land, but land and titles. She could have become Duke Duchess Roberta Cowell of Transylvania. I don't know. But the point is, that's awesome. In November 1958, Roberta got an ex-RAF de Havilland Mosquito, also known as the Wooden Wonder, because unlike other planes during World War II, this plane was mostly made out of wood. Because that's a smart material to build a plane out of in World War II. She got this plane with the intention to break the record for flying over the South Atlantic. Unfortunately, this dream didn't happen because she couldn't find good enough engines, and in that same year, she went bankrupt with debts totaling to $465,650 in US money today. Quote, "I say I have no assets. I believe it has been put down as £2." End quote. By 1959, her plane deteriorated, and by 1960, she sold it for scraps. Personally, since it's made out of wood, I would have kept some of the wood to build a fire to make s'mores. But that's just me. Her money troubles continues as she found it hard to find work. I don't know why, but it just was. And in later years, she basically fully dropped out of the public eye. But she was still an active figure in the British motor racing world throughout the 1970s. She was able to fly again, and by the 1970s, she had logged over 1,600 hours as a pilot. In a brief and unfortunate interview in the British Sunday Times with journalist Michael Bateman in March of 1972, she revealed that she was working on another biography. And in the interview, she stated that she was intersex with the XX male chromosome anomaly. And since I am sick, I'm going to have me in the Lily Elbe video explain what that is. Some say Lily already had Klinefelter syndrome, or KS. Also known as 47XXY, is a chromosome anomaly where a male has an extra X chromosome. Warning, get ready for a lot of X's and Y's. Now we know that males have one chromosome and females have two X chromosomes. Most men have an XY chromosome, the Y referring to the genetic tool the sperm needs to make an egg male. When it comes to Lily and Klinefelter syndrome, an XXY chromosome basically means there's more female chromosomes in a male body. It is also thought that Lily was intersex, basically people who don't fit the typical biological traits of male or female bodies. This does include unnatural chromosome patterns, and that this justified her transition. She also said derogatory terms of people with the XY chromosomes that had male to female transition surgery, saying, quote, "The people who have followed me have often been those with male chromosomes XY. So they've been normal people who've turned themselves into freaks by means of the operation." End quote. Look, also in this interview, she admitted to have driven a car in the wrong direction on the M1, which is basically a major freeway in England, for 30-ish miles, going really, really fast in the wrong direction. Luckily, no one was hurt or killed, and she was caught by the police, fined £100, and was banned from driving for a year. She has no idea why she did it. She told the officers that, quote, "It's all quite hazy. I'm so tired." So to me, this just shows that she's kind of spiraling in a mental state. Doesn't justify what she said, but she's clearly going a little bit down. Now, her final years are unique. By the late 1980s, Roberta moved in with some chick named Lisa, who she met in the late 1940s that became a lifelong friend of Roberta's. I don't know. Anyway, she moved in with this chick Lisa and her 40 cats. 40 cats. As you do. When Lisa died in 1990, Roberta moved into a different flat in Hampton. I don't know what happened to the cats. I hope they were all given to loving families. In this flat, she would stay for the rest of her days, owning and driving large, powerful cars. A neighbor of hers, Ivy Mason, remembered Roberta in her final years that, quote, "She always had an expensive car, a big black one. She had been tall but walked with a stoop. She painted her nails red and wore red lipstick and wore a big brown wig." End quote. Jane Armorid was Roberta's last friend and later remarked that she didn't know any details of her past. Quote, "We had no idea what had become of her children as she never talked about it, but she was always very interested in my children." End quote. She also said that Roberta was diminished towards the end of her life and that her spine had become double bent, and she had swollen legs that made walking nearly impossible. Roberta Elizabeth Marshall Cowell died on October 11th, 2011 of old age in her home on her bedroom floor by herself at the age of 93. When her body was found, her flat was reportedly so cluttered that it made removing her body difficult. Her funeral was not publicized based on her instructions and was attended by only 6 people. Her death was publicized 2 years later in 2013 in the October issue of the Independent newspaper. On June 5th, 2020, the New York Times published Roberta's obituary in their Overlooked No More series. In that 2013 Independent article, it found Roberta's two daughters who last saw him in 1948 when their parents separated. Annie was 6 and Diana was 4. They would never see or hear from their father again. Their mother had remarried and had 3 more kids, and they were raised by their grandparents. When their father died, the girls were 71 and 69 and were shocked to learn of their father's death. Anna was told what their father did, while Diana didn't find out till later in life. Quote, "Nobody told me about the sex change. I read about it in a newspaper. They were trying to protect me, but it was the biggest shock of my life. I must have been 12 or 13. The worst thing was that suddenly I knew this was reality. Your father's not coming back to you, ever, and that's why it hurt so much." End quote. The girls said their mother was shocked and humiliated by her husband's decision and threw herself into rebuilding her life and forgetting about her as quickly as possible. However, despite the hurt their father gave them, Annie and Diana were incredibly proud of their father. Quote, "He stood up for himself. He did what he felt was right. And what can you do? I think his actual words were, 'It's easier to change a body than a mind.'" End quote. The girls, of course, wished they could have met Roberta later in life. Annie said, quote, "I just think it's sad we could never be friends, especially now we know that at the end she died alone in sheltered housing." End quote. And Diana said, quote, "She was an extraordinary woman. I would have loved to have been with her before she died. We are your family, and whatever happens, there is a bond that nothing can change." End quote. Though Roberta's life ended tragically and lonely, she is now recognized as a trailblazer in her transition and public showing of her gender identity for the first time in British history. Even though her racing and aviation career stopped short due to her transition, she still made the world diverse and made the aviation and racing world more opening and welcoming to future transgender people, even if it was just a little. She said in her autobiography, quote, "Since May 18th, 1951, I have been Roberta Cowell, female. I have become woman physically, psychologically, gladiatorily, and legally." End quote. There you go. Story of first transgender woman in UK history. I'm sorry if it was a little all over the place and if I was off. Again, I'm sick. I'm doing my best right now. Life's crazy right now. Doing the best that I can. And I want to say once again, as we close this wonderful month of Pride Month out, thank you for all of the truly beautiful, gracious comments that I have gotten on both of my transgender and drag queen videos, and I can truly feel all of the love coming through all of your views and all of your comments. And to all of the new subscribers, welcome, stick around, share, like, comments. I'm excited to have all the new eyes here. I'm just past the 150 mark subscribers, and it's a small number, but it's a good sized community that we have here, and I'm happy, and it's all a loving community, and I love it so much. And with that and Roberta's story, if you learned something today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly, kind comment. You guys have been doing very good about that. I haven't had to block or delete any comments or any people. I will see you in my next video when I am not sick. But until then, don't be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, guys. I'm gonna go blow up my nose.